I'm so excited to welcome you to Lessons Earned in DE&I, Conversations with, and today I'm so excited to tell you that Jimmie McMillan is here. Somebody that has impacted my own personal growth literally from a moderator's podium. But let me tell you a little bit about him. First and foremost, he's a member of the 317 Motorcycle Club. He's the Chief Diversity Officer and Senior Corporate Counsel at Penske Entertainment Group. And he's the president of the Indianapolis Bar Association. Jimmie, I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here as well, and I appreciate the opportunity, Brooke.
Well, today, what we're going to talk about is what we're passionate about, which is diversity. And I know with your background in racing, which is very exciting here in Indianapolis, that you have created and are starting to create whole new pipelines in diversity. And so I thought you could share with us some of the lessons that you've learned along the way as we advance our diversity program that you could share with us and the folks that watch us today.
Well, thank you, Brooke, for the opportunity. And yes, we at Penske Entertainment, which includes the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the NTT IndyCar Series, and Indianapolis Motor Speedway Productions, are very excited about what we call our Race for Equality and Change, which is our DEI program. We started this a while back before actually Roger Penske bought the track. We were Mark Miles, our CEO, Doug Bowles, our president of the Speedway, Jay Fry at IndyCar. We were all working on different initiatives to try to work on diversity, and starting with our internal employment, which I think is near and dear probably to the folks listening to this podcast, trying to figure out how do we work through the very difficult issue of how do you increase your diversity numbers, particularly with respect to race. We actually have done better with women, particularly in our administrative side. We have a wonderful leadership from women in our organization, including superstars like Allison Melanchthon, who everybody knows, and Gretchen Snelling, who's been our longtime general counsel. And Cindy Lucchese, we've just done really well there. But we saw that in terms of race, we really have struggled, and we needed to make change. And so at that time, we started a diversity committee, and we were starting to look at and analyze our statistics in terms of applicants, interview pool, all of the things that everyone looks at. And then Roger Penske buys the track, and then COVID hits, and then we're wondering whether we're going to have a 500. And all of these things kind of rest while we're trying to figure out those very serious and important issues as well. And then George Floyd is murdered. And once again, this issue rises immediately to the surface. And Mark Miles, our CEO, has a discussion with Roger Penske. And I get a phone call that I need to come into the office so we can work on a plan. And literally over the course of a few hours, we all sat down and created the Race for Equality and Change that we announced the 4th of July weekend. That plan is exciting and engaging. It's an opportunity not only to transform our organizations, but also to transform motorsports as a whole. And it's all about providing opportunities to underrepresented folks in our sport, because we believe it's the right thing to do. But we also believe it, from a financial perspective, it's the important thing to do. We want to have outreach to all of our community. We want everyone to feel like our sport belongs to them. We want everyone to feel welcome. We want everyone to feel a part. And we certainly want people who have talents and ability to contribute to our sport to bring those talents and abilities to our sport, and it's in the form of being employees, drivers, throughout our industry. We want them to be there.
So when we talk about diversity, you and I have talked about the hardest place to start. And you had told me communication, because this is a hard subject. So where have you started?
Communication is by far the hardest and biggest challenge, because if you can't, at some level, communicate, you can't move forward as a team. We all have to be able to bring our true feelings, our true emotions, our true thoughts to the table, to be able to baseline, where are we really at? What are our real challenges? And be honest and be open about them without fear of reprisal or without fear of judgment. And unfortunately, right now, it's very hard to be honest, particularly sometimes in the workplace, about things that you think about in terms of race and gender. There's this extreme fear, and I get it all the time, and I'm sure most diversity officers do, where people will close the door and say, can I say something? I don't want to offend you. I don't want to offend anybody. And I say, hey, don't worry about offending me. Don't worry about, let's pretend that I'm not gonna break like glass. I've heard things before, but I want you to be able to talk candidly, because I can't solve your problem. I can't help you understand my situation unless I hear your candid perception. Mm-hmm. And that goes for employees, that goes for supervisors, that goes for people who are in the majority, and maybe people who are in the minority. All of those walls have to be torn down, and barriers have to be torn down, so we can have frank discussions and come up with real solutions. Without that, there's a lot of guessing and guesswork that may send you down rabbit holes with no results.
We know that we have to start looking at it as a whole. And one person, just leadership has to be on board, but it can't just be a few folks. And so when we've talked about building an inclusive culture. And one of the things that you've taught me so much about is mentorship. And I know that you're passionate about mentorship because I've listened to almost all of your podcasts you've ever done. And so I thought we could talk about, I think it's so important that when we start mentorship programs, we just don't start the plate spinning and walking away, because that's not going to help anybody. Right?
I absolutely agree. I think, one, we have to realize that everyone has a different ideal of what being a mentor means. And sometimes we talk about the difference between mentorship and advocacy. So I can tell you that when I worked at a law firm, we used to start our mentorship programs with an actual program with a handout that talked about what mentorship was and what it was not. And it would be presented by actually one of the best mentors in the business, a guy named Penske, who was my mentor at Barnes & Thornburg. We would co-present. He was my mentor the entire time I was there. We talk about, very frankly, about do's and don'ts, and we talked about pros and cons, and we talk about expectations. The biggest thing we talk about is, what are the expectations on the mentor, but what are the expectations of the mentee? And trying to level set so that all parties kind of had at least some framework for what to expect and to know, okay, this relationship is failing or it's not. I can't tell you how many times we went and talked to a mentor, and they thought they were doing a fantastic job mentoring. And then you go talk to the mentee and they're like, I can't stand that person, or I haven't heard from that person in a month, or they don't respond to my email, they don't respond to my calls, or we go out to lunch and I feel like we have nothing in common. I don't feel comfortable. I don't trust that person. But the mentor thinks they are one of the best. They're waiting for their mentor award at the end of the year. That's how off it can be. But when the relationships work and there is mutual understanding, it can be amazingly successful. And not only dealing with diversity and inclusion issues, but many other issues that occur regardless of race or gender. And so having a strong mentorship program gives you a one-on-one opportunity for communication and relationship building that may transcend and be more beneficial in terms of retention of a great employee than just a typical HR relationship or supervisor relationship, or some relationship where there's not this building of trust and open communication.
So when you talk about relationship, because that's what it is, I think it's so hard to build trust. And so what advice would you offer to that mentor to build trust with that mentoree? Because to your point, there's nervousness on both sides as to who can trust who.
So first, I think it starts there, is realizing there has to be mutual trust. The first piece of advice I would give is patience. There are some folks who want, love at first sight. The first time we go out to that lunch, you're going to tell me everything about you, and I'm going to tell you everything about me, and then we're going to be a match. And then from that point, it's going to be, peaches and cream all the way through. That's rare, if ever. People are naturally reserved, and particularly when you talk about someone who might be diverse from the actual mentee, a woman being mentored by a man, a Black person being mentored by a white person, you may have a little hesitance that comes from those cultural distinctions of being openly genuine on the first meeting. So you have to have patience. 2, you have to realize this is a feeling out process. And so people typically will test you by dropping certain information to see what your reaction is. What's your facial expression when I tell you something that you may not have expected? Do you laugh at me? Do you smile at me? Do you create an air of, who's going to be the first to create this air of trust and kind of a bubble of confidentiality that, hey, I'm going to say some things to you that I may not want put in a report or the email when you get back. I may not want shared with my supervisors. And are you really the type of person to do that? So that may be piecemeal trust. Sometimes people are not going to give you everything, but they'll give you enough to figure out, is this somebody who I can really trust? We also discussed mutual sharing of expectations, right? So we're sitting here at this lunch. I'm going to give you some advice as from a mentor to mentee. I'm going to give you some things that you can maybe do to improve your situation at work. I'm going to respond to some of your questions and some of your issues and comments. But I want to see that you follow up. I call it running the play. Nobody wants to coach somebody. Nobody wants to mentor somebody who you spend an hour or 2 hours giving them great advice, and then the next time you see them, they haven't done anything. That's frustrating, and eventually the mentor will say, this is pointless. Same thing with mentee. If a mentee is asking their mentor to take certain steps or talking about certain concerns, and the mentor says, well, I'm going to follow up with your supervisor. I'm going to follow up and kind of ask questions around and get you a response. The speed and the accuracy of that response will determine whether that mentee builds a real relationship with the mentor. And that's just as important, that mutual expectation and level setting and mutual commitment, and then activity and work that comes behind it. And eventually you'll see when that works out well, the mentee will adopt some of the goodwill and credibility of the mentor, because everybody knows, that guy plays for Ken's team, and everybody who plays for Ken's team is a winner. With the same level of precision, the mentor will start to invest in the mentee as a member of his team, who's a representative. And I'm going to make sure you have those opportunities. So many times, unfortunately, we find that for whatever reason, people of color or women find themselves not affiliated with the good team. And that becomes part of why they don't stay, because they're not connected with that one person who seems to always get the great assignments, who seem to always be on succession plan, who seem to always know background information and inside information about what's going on in the organization that hasn't been shared on any email or in any string or in any public announcement, but somehow they always know. They're always invited to the dinner or the picnic or the barbecue that was at somebody's house, or the golf outing or the boating trip, but they don't get that invitation and they don't get asked out. And typically when you ask the mentor who did the invitation, he says, well, I just didn't think that person would feel comfortable and want to do. You got to break those things down and try to figure out, okay, how do we create an environment where everyone feels a part and feels engaged and feels accepted and feels like they are getting real, genuine, walls down, no ceilings, no roof mentorship from the people that matter within the organization. And only then can you start to fight the retention issue.
So when we talk about the vulnerability, how can you build as a mentor that vulnerability with that mentoree? So they trust you because they've seen you authentic. They've seen you vulnerable. They're not just seeing your public facing side. So it establishes that mutual trust.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is, for me, it's been, do I know who your family is? When you start talking about family situations, when you start talking about things that I'm worried about, we're all worried about family. So sometimes it's taking the wall down of, I'm a real person. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when you've been in a job for a certain period of time, you don't realize new people may look at you like you're a god. Sometimes creating vulnerability is saying, I'm not a god, I'm a real person. And today I'm having an issue with my kid, and I want advice from you about it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's making the mentee feel like you can provide value to me. And I noticed that I have a problem or an issue with networking, but you seem to network extremely well. Can you tell me how you do that? Imagine the power of that. A mentee comes in and their mentor, who they've watched and they think it just has it all together, comes to them and actually asks them for advice during a meeting that they genuinely have a problem with. That creates vulnerability. That creates he's vulnerable too, or she's vulnerable too. Displaying or discussing some failure that you may have had, some time where you didn't get it right, a time when you actually were maybe scared that you were going to get fired, or a time when you were actually scared or thinking about leaving the company. Providing that to a mentee to say, look, you're not alone. I've been exactly where you have been, and this is how I recovered, or this is how I came out of it. This is how I developed. But please don't think you're the first person to make a mistake or an error, or you're the first person to feel like a failure. That giving that level of vulnerability to a mentee. Now realize you as a mentor may say, man, I don't want this mentee to use it against me. So again, it takes patience to know whether you can display that and say that, and the mentee is not gonna run and tell everybody else in the office pool what you just said. But when you get there, that's a very powerful moment, because that person is gonna trust you because you trusted them. Mm-hmm. You can't expect someone to come to you as an open book if you're not an open book. And so to a certain level, mentorship, mentee is like a clasp of hands. Your fingers locking into their fingers. It's not just you looking at their hand and trying to read their hand, but it's really you reading each other and trying to grow together.
So I've heard you say also that growth isn't positivity. So it can't be positive all the time. And I think that can be really hard for both parties. And so when we talk about the two-way street of the mentor and the mentee, I don't understand why my performance review didn't go well, or I don't understand why this manager doesn't like to work with me. Could you help me with that? I think that can be hard for the mentor to come back and give them information that they may not want to hear.
You're not a good mentor if all you do is tell me positive. If all you do is sit down and tell me the positive things that I've done, and you don't tell me the mistakes that I've made, or you don't tell me how I can grow. If you're not looking for ways that I can grow, it's not that you have to sit up and beat me down during every meeting, because that's not helpful either. But it's a ham sandwich style. You start with something good, and in the middle there may be something bad, but in the end I'm going to pick you up and give you something good. So it's the ham sandwich style of communication and mentorship, where every time I should walk away with at least some idea in some fashion that there is something that I could do better, or there's something that I'm missing, or that there's something that I can improve upon. And those difficult conversations, the ones that might be perceived by some as negative conversations, the ones that may have to be at some point strong and harsh conversations, those are when you have a real mentor, someone who can give you that type of feedback, but make it relatable so that you understand this is coming from their heart. They're not trying to put me down. They're trying to make me feel bad. They're not telling me this because I'm Black or I'm Latino or I'm a woman. They're telling me this because they understand what it takes to be successful in this environment. And they want me to be successful as well. And they want to have a candid and open conversation with me about it. Mm-hmm. Now, hopefully you've gotten to the point that the mentee can react to that. So I'll give you an example. You say to your mentor, I don't understand my evaluation. They keep saying that I'm not present, that I don't come to work enough, that, I'm here in the morning, I'm here in the afternoon, I have to pick up my kids, and sometimes I leave at 2:33 because if I miss the daycare appointment, it's another, I get hit with a fine. Some mentors might be hesitant to say what might be the truth, mm-hmm. which is you have supervisors who are at work until 4, 5, 6 o'clock. And a lot of times they have team meetings at 5 or 6, and you're not there. And because you're not there, that is why they view you as not being a part of the team. That is why you're getting the reviews you're getting. Some mentors may be hesitant to say that because they may say, if I say this to a woman, what am I going to be viewed as? Am I going to be viewed as being sexist? Am I going to be viewed as being not understanding of her need to go care for her children? I mean, how do I say this to her? Even though they know that's the truth. Mm-hmm. Will I get in trouble as a mentor if I say that's really what everyone is saying? And does she take that information and go back and maybe sue the company and say, hey, I'm being discriminated against because I have to go pick up my kids at 3 and they're having meetings at 4 or 5 and then they're not including me and I'm a single mom and I have to care for my kids and this is the only way I can do it. But if you don't tell that person, figure out some way, if the mentor doesn't figure out in some way to convey to the mentee that that's the real issue, if it is the real issue, it's going to crash and burn on its own. And the frustration that mentee will feel, I mean, what happens is that mentee goes and talks to the other diverse friends and colleagues that they have, the other women out there in the community, and says, they may not say it to you, but they'll say it to them, I had a horrible experience at that workplace. They didn't give me projects. They didn't give me opportunities. I have no clue why. So at some point, a real mentor is going to have that conversation and figure out a way to professionally say, did you know that your team has meetings at 4 or 5 o'clock? Well, yeah, I knew that they have meetings at 4 or 5 o'clock, but I have to pick up my kids. And I told my supervisor that I have to pick up my kids at 2:30. And if they have projects, they could get it to me the next day. Well, how often do you follow up the next day to find out what happened in those meetings? How do you follow up? Well, I don't follow up. I just assume that if they had a project for me to do and they assigned it, they know that I'm picking up my kid, that they would just give it to me. Okay, so let's talk about maybe how you should follow up for those meetings. Have you ever asked if you can attend those meetings by phone? No, I haven't asked if I could. Nobody told me I needed to attend them by phone. I didn't think they were that important. I just thought that they would just give me the project. Okay. All right, well, let's talk about whether we can get a method for you to attend them by phone. That's a real mentor-mentee conversation for something that could be perceived as being difficult and impossible to discuss, and easier to just let lie and say, you know what, I don't want to be the guy that gets caught up in some kind of lawsuit accusation that I don't treat women fairly. But if you don't have the courage and the ability and the confidence and trust to have those conversations, you're going to probably lose that employee, from what I've seen and experienced.
I really like those descriptors. The courage, the confidence, the trust. So when we're talking about that, that's how we build these relationships. And this conversation has been amazing. So I really appreciate you taking the time and coming and talking with us. And thank you so much. We just can't tell you how much we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brooke, for doing this. I think this is very helpful, and I get as much out of these conversations as you do, and I appreciate this opportunity, and I hope that everyone understands this is not easy work. It's extremely difficult. If it wasn't, we wouldn't need it. But patience is really key, and you will have victories. If you keep working on it and focus on it, there will be victories. And we are growing and getting better as a culture and a society. I have great faith and belief that there are so many good people, good business owners, CEOs, great folks out there who want this. And they are working tirelessly to make it happen. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jimmie.